Welcome back to the Post-Capitalism Conference. Sorry for a little bit of a wait there. We were waiting on our comrade and friend Kali. Kali is going to be joining us in just a little bit, but he is dealing with some legal issues. Some folks from Cooperation Jackson were arrested today, and so he's dealing with lawyers, but he should be with us soon. But you are at the post-pandemic economy. What will it look like? And I think it's important to note that this is part of life, people being arrested, and that Mel Figueroa, who is also with us today, is going to have to leave us a little bit because she is dealing with an end of life situation in her family. So very, very grateful and humbled by these folks that are here with us today for the post-pandemic economy. What will it look like? I think it's implicit in the title, what we're going to talk about today. There is really no return to life, what life was like before the pandemic. And frankly, I don't want to return to what life was like before the pandemic because we lived and still do live in a racist, sexist, class-oppressive system. And it became very apparent to many folks during the pandemic how that affected the way that we live. So when we look at what is the post-pandemic going to look at, we have to look at what kind of world do we want to live in. And I know that I want to live in one where everyone's needs are met, where people are cared for, where we're real with each other. And I think that's really important. So we brought this panel together of folks to talk about how can we envision what the world is going to look like as we come out of this pandemic, and also what are the steps that we need to take to get there. So on this panel today, we're going to start with Mel Figueroa, and then we'll hand it over to Michael ONeill, and then hopefully, fingers crossed, Kali Akuno will be with us by then, and then the three of them will be able to have a dialogue. So I'm going to turn it over to Mel Figueroa, my friend, one of the smartest people that I know, and she is an active participant with the Chico Traditional Ecological Stewardship Program and a faculty owner at the Cooperative New School for Urban Studies. Meet Mel Figueroa.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us on this beautiful Sunday. Well, I'm in LA right now. It's cloudy, but not raining yet, but hoping for some rain. I was going to actually just go into sort of straightforward presentation about the Chico Traditional Ecological Stewardship Program that I am involved with in occupied Mechoopda territory, which is otherwise known as Chico, California. And I'm going to put the website right here in there. But I also read a very profound article this morning, just this morning on Facebook, that really helped to focus, I think, what a lot of us might be feeling in terms of the post-pandemic economy. So I'm going to put that link in the chat as well. And it's called The Capitalism is Broken Economy. And, what this article is about is that there's apparently, right, a spate of problems with employers around the country about how now that, the pandemic is, things are opening up again, and, businesses are wanting workers, that they're not able to find enough workers that are willing to apply for some of these jobs. Things like low paid, low wage, fast food, restaurant, what we generally call the shit jobs, right? And of course, what the employers are saying is that they're blaming, right, the pandemic unemployment relief. They're blaming, the big government social welfare provisions for for the lack of workers that are actually willing to apply even for these jobs. And it's very interesting, like, going through this article and seeing the backlash on social media from this, that people are just over exploitation. This is apparently a thing now. People are saying, you know what, we don't feel like risking our lives to work for $8 an hour so that we can not afford our apartments and, basically be scraping by. So, one of the things that is coming out of the pandemic, the pandemic has laid bare the coercive and super exploitative nature of capitalism in all of its ugliness, right? The fact that for the first time, right, people are actually thinking like, oh my God, like I can actually say no to a super exploitative position, and I don't have to be forced into this. And so, in terms of seeing the desire of people to have a different life, right? They see a glimpse of a different life that is possible, and they're trying to grasp it with both hands. At the same time, we are seeing that clearly that what the pandemic has shown is that this entire way that the global economy is structured just is entirely harmful to the planet as well as ourselves, right? The very fact that where the pandemic came from was from the destruction of ecosystems that drove pathogens into populated areas, the nature of industrial agriculture and feedlots that make pandemics, animal-borne pandemics, more likely. All of this is laying bare the fact that this system is just at a point where it just doesn't work, right? And so people, we can see a widespread desire for something else. We can see that acknowledgement. But again, and David knows because we've run these workshops where we ask people to envision what a world that they want to live in looks like. And what I do in these exercises is I tell people, don't say the word "not this," right? Usually when we ask these questions, people are like, well, I want a world where we're not exploited, where there's not imperialism, where there's not this. And of course, but then what is the converse of what that looks like? And so all this to say is that, in terms of how can we get out of this seeming conundrum, it forces us to take a look at our relationships with everything, right? Our relationships with each other as people, with our families, and especially with our resources, right? And that's where I'm coming to this point about relocalizing our economies, right? The fact that and the what I do and with the Machuca tribal members in the Chico traditional ecological stewardship program is looking at land management from indigenous-led land management. Now, what does that mean? When you think about land management, try to think about who actually touches the land where you live. Who is in charge and who does the daily work of managing your parks, right? Who makes the decisions about what kinds of plants go, on the roadsides and in these in areas? What are the types? Who makes the decisions as to what type of plants are appropriate for a particular place? Right? So one of the things that we do here, and I'm going to share my screen real quick, in the Chico Traditional Ecological Stewardship Program, is using traditional ecological knowledge, meaning indigenous knowledge of land management, to build economies off of that land management, right? And what does that mean? Well, I mean, kind of for 99.9% of human existence, people have built economies off of their own local resources, right? This is actually true of pretty much the entire human story before capitalism, with the exception of the colonial and those empires, right? Which empires are also about resources, right? So one of the things that is very particular about TK is that it's place-based. Okay, if you go to I think it's the website Native Lands, right? Everywhere that you walk on this, on this earth, but also especially on Turtle Island, is the territory of an indigenous people, right? And what that means, right? What does it actually mean in a physical and ecological sense? It means that one of the concepts that we talk about is that there's cultural keystone species, is that the plants and animals that play critical roles in maintaining ecosystems are also tend to be the culturally significant species to a people. They're staple foods, they're medicines, they're sacred plants. They have histories, traditions, and shared histories with the people who lived in that place, right? And so one of the things that we do, and I myself am not native to this continent, but and so I'm sort of speaking from my own position as a non-native person who works in solidarity with, and every day with an indigenous-led land stewardship project, is that when we think about it, what is my role, and conversely, what are our roles as non-native people on indigenous territory look like? What that looks like is acknowledging that the basic ecosystem dynamics and of a place, of an ecosystem, is also contains the knowledge and authority of the indigenous people to that place, right? So everyone, so one of the principles that we work in our program is to is number one, for the tribe to have rights to land and also to manage the land, but also to educate the community, because everyone who touches the land, from the landscapers, homeowners, park rangers, city and county planners, everyone needs to understand, right, that this place is not the same as Europe or, other places where you can just bring in whatever plants that look good and get your food from somewhere else, right? From a CAFO in something that's owned by an agribusiness, right? Even our housing problems today, right? A lot of developers will say, well, the reason that we can't make housing affordable is because, our materials are too expensive, right? I hear that all the time in Chico, where literally there are timber plantations like less than 5 miles from the spot. Why? Because capitalism has made it so that the trees that are in that place get cut down by a timber company, shipped to China to get treated, and then they sell it back to you at quadruple the price. That makes zero sense, right? So the idea of a post-pandemic economy, right, in terms of land management is, number one, going back to understanding what it means to live in a place, right? And that means learning and giving off and accepting the authority of the indigenous people that live there. Number two is also understanding that that in order to that we can live sustainably and do so in a way that helps us thrive, not just survive. Okay, I know I'm going a little over, so I just wanted to sort of set that, and then I'll give it over to Michael now, who's going to talk about the political implications of this moment as well. So
thank you, Mel. Hello, people of Earth. My name is Michael ONeill. I am a steering committee member of the Green Eco-Socialist Network. I also serve as the communications manager for the Green Party of the United States. And I have some contact information over my other shoulder, actually, that you can take a look at where I am on Twitter, my email address, the website for the Green Eco-Socialist Network and the Green Party of the United States, and then a somewhat indecipherable URL, which I will unpack for you later on in the presentation. And one of the benefits of presenting late into a conference is you get to build on all of the brilliant things that people much more intelligent than you have already said over the course of the week or weekend. So I'm very grateful to be presenting at this spot, because I will be presenting on some items that will build on some wonderful things that I heard Rick Wolf say and Emily Kawano say and other fabulous presenters who you've enjoyed over the course of the weekend, and I hope to live up to their standard. In answering the question, what will the post-pandemic economy look like? I asked myself, well, what does the current pandemic economy look like now? And while there have been amazing, important flourishings of mutual aid networks and solidarity economy responses that we need to celebrate and spread and raise awareness of, there are other aspects of the pandemic economy that we also need to be attentive to. For instance, as of February 19th of this year, the country's 664 billionaires' wealth had increased by $1.3 trillion since the beginning of the pandemic. So for the billionaires, they've had a great pandemic. They're having a gangbuster pandemic. And then we also hear a lot about how the businesses that have been most likely to weather the shutdowns have been the chain stores, the chain restaurants, the chain pizza places, the ones that are part of connected, highly capitalized corporations that have greater access to credit, that have lobbyist teams that are working to make sure that they're taking advantage of every possible government program designed to assist those smaller businesses. But we've all read the headlines of some of the firms that took advantage of those programs that we probably were not thinking of as the kind of frontline, locally based, community-based institutions that we wanted support funds to go to. But as with so many things in our society, the people with the resources and the lawyers and the lobbyists to get access to that resources, they're going to try and scoop it up for themselves. And that's the imperative they operate under within capitalism. So when we're talking about what will the post-pandemic economy look like, I think ultimately it's going to look like, or it's going to resemble, the character and the nature of the power structure that wins the political and social decisions about what we do next as a society. That we are in a moment of credibility gaps, and we are in a moment where expectations are shifting. And so you've got what the billionaires want, which is, as I like to refer to it, the Super League scenario. So for those of you who follow sport, I know that might not be a high interest in this particular audience I'm speaking to, but it's a good thing to keep tabs on, because in a way, professional sports is like a capitalism simulator that you can watch run, and there are things that play out there that you can kind of see coming down the pipe for the rest of us. So in Europe, they have the top owners of the big European soccer or football leagues or clubs. They've wanted to kind of abandon their national leagues and just have like the biggest, most richest teams in in the UK play the biggest and most richest teams in Spain, and the biggest, most richest teams in Germany, and the biggest, most richest teams in Italy. And they form the Super League where all the richest teams will play each other and make all the money and forget about the domestic leagues or the stuff that's governed by FIFA, where you have to actually play into a tournament and they get all the guaranteed money. Basically, they want to turn their leagues into like what we have in the United States with the NFL, where it's a big cartel and everyone is going to get guaranteed money, and you don't have to worry about promotion or relegation or anything like that, which means you don't have to worry about losing your spot in the league because your team is in the gutter. And you don't have to worry about some upstart scrappy team taking your place because they had the temerity to actually play better than you. So we're trying to kind of import, and some of this is from American owners, Americans who have taken over European soccer clubs and trying to import this cartel structure, socialism for the rich, socialism for the owner structure into European sports. And basically take all the civic pride and community connection and all the things that have built these brands and these entities up into multi-billion-dollar enterprises, feed all that stuff into a wood chipper, and then just extract the pulp of whatever it is that they can monetize into global jersey sales and global TV rights for broadcast, and leave the fans who built up these things into what they are, along with the players, by the wayside. Well, the good news, and this is where I start to transition from the doomer vision into a more optimistic, positive approach, is that the Super League failed. This league that they debuted last week, that's been in the works for literally decades, but they made a real go of it in the last week. They got JP Morgan Chase to give them $4 billion. And it like, just for participating in the league, founding clubs would have gotten more money than they would have gotten if they won their domestic leagues nationally. So you had this big, juggernaut of money behind it, and they were using COVID as a pretext for forming this Super League because they operated at such a loss last year because they didn't have fans in the stands. And so this was the only thing that they could do to ensure that these teams could remain viable, was to form a JP Morgan Chase billion-dollar backed Super League that they've wanted for decades anyway. Imagine that. It's classic disaster capitalism. It's classic don't let a crisis go to waste thinking on the part of the capitalist and the owner class. And so that's what the billionaires want. They want higher concentration. They want to lower the expectations of everyone else. They want to diminish community ties. They want higher precarity. They want more money for the billionaires and the Bezoses and the Elon Musks. And I think what a lot of everyday people want is, I think a lot of everyday people do just want things to go back to the way they are. And that's one of the dangers of crises, is like, yes, as radicals, as organizers, as educators, we would love for the vast throngs of the masses to realize that, holy cow, the fact that we went into this with no single payer healthcare and no guaranteed coverage of medical expenses, that like, this is ridiculous. Like, our society shouldn't be operating that way. But one of the problems with crisis that we saw in the 2008 housing crisis and the economic meltdown that followed from that Sam Gindin and Leo Panitch pointed out, is that when you have a crisis, for a lot of people, whatever it was that was immediately before the crisis starts to look good, or at least it looks better than it did, right? And that's part of that ratcheting down of worker expectations, of lowering the expectations of everyday people. And it's like, the thing that I was protesting about 5 years ago, oh my God, I'll take that as long as it's, better than what we're going through right now. And so this is the battle that we have to wage, is that we have to show up as a coalition, as people who have an alternative vision, that maybe we can even take the space that we have here where there is a credibility gap among politicians, where you do have communities that are riled up to hold the power structure's feet to the fire about their vast failings in the handling of the pandemic, to say, we need to make decisions about these things in a different way. And we need to make changes in how we decide who will be making those decisions. To put it another way, we need to actually democratize our elections. We need to have people in government that actually represent us, so that we can get some of the transformative, non-reformist reforms that we've been demanding for generations, because it's not just about a nice to have. Right? Single payer healthcare is not just a nice to have. It would have actually prevented the deaths of countless people in this pandemic in this country. And so we have a moment to demand those, not just those reforms in our economy, but also in our political structure, so that we actually have real choices when we go to the voting booth, that we're not being railroaded into voting against the candidate that we fear most, but that we can vote for the candidate that we think actually represents our values. And I was just really inspired by what Rick Wolf was saying at the end of the session he presented at, saying that the worker co-op movement, and I feel confident saying the solidarity economy movement writ large, needs its own political party to go out there and beat the bushes to get the tax cuts and the subsidies and the other supports that will make it much easier for us to start co-ops and build co-ops. And you could also fill in community land trusts and public banks and community gardens and all of the different elements that have been sketched out over the course of this conference for a post-capitalist, post-pandemic society. And to that end, I just wanted to present one quick tool that people can put to work this year in this election cycle, which is a solidarity economy questionnaire. And a solidarity economy candidate questionnaire. And you can visit this by going to the URL I referred to earlier, that's just over my shoulder, bit.ly/SECQ21. That's SE as in solidarity economy, CQ as in candidate questionnaire, and 21 for the year 2021 in the Common Era. And that will take you to this publicly viewable Google Doc. And this is a working draft of this solidarity economy questionnaire, which hopefully you can see and share screen. And it gives you a chance to put the candidates running for election in your district on the record about probably some concepts they've never even heard of before, right? And that's the first part, is at least putting this on their radar and letting them know that someone is going to be holding them to account for this, and asking them about worker-owned cooperatives, asking them about community land trusts, asking them about energy democracy, and asking them about public banking and participatory budgeting. And so we will be debuting this questionnaire, which if you choose to use it in your community, if your organization puts it out there, you want to make sure that you are circulating it to every candidate that is running for the election of that office. Don't be selective about who you send it to. You have to send it to everyone who's running for that office. And then we'll have a place to get those answers back to. And then people in the movement, in your community and abroad, can see how people running for office are answering these questions on these critical reforms. And so there's more to come about that, to get that up online at a great URL and a great website to present that for folks to use in the general election this November. So we've got to show up, we've got to fight, we've got to be those imaginal selves that Emily Kawano was talking about in her amazing presentation, of how, like, once we start clumping together, when the people fighting for ranked choice voting and participatory budgeting and proportional representation and public banks, when we start coming together, when people like myself and the Green Party are making time and breaking bread with people in the public banking movement, as my comrades in California have been, with what can candidates running for municipal office actually do to improve the lot of worker cooperatives in that community, that is where we can overcome the super league version of a post-pandemic society, and maybe even build a justice league version of a post-pandemic, post-capitalist society.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate that. Yay. So I want to present David Cobb, who has been communicating with Kali for our next piece of the message. David?
Howdy, y'all. So I know I am a poor replacement for my comrade and friend Kali Akuno, but he and I have been texting. He did let me know. So I want to, first of all, he sends his greetings to you and his apologies for not being able to be there, but he is literally dealing with the police as we speak. Here's what I can report. I can report that 2 of the colleagues and comrades at Cooperation Jackson were arrested in one of the Klan-ridden towns just east of Jackson, Mississippi. The original charge was apparently grand theft auto. By the way, just to really put it into context, they were literally hauling produce from Freedom Farm, one of the worker-owned farming cooperatives that Cooperation Jackson operates. Kali says none of this is making sense at all because they cleared up pretty quickly that those vehicles were in fact owned by, were not stolen vehicles. So they cleared that up quickly. There's still some confusion because they've already impounded the vehicles. So none of this is making sense unless you know that Kali and most of the comrades at Cooperation Jackson are Black in a rural area of Mississippi. So then it kind of makes some sense, right? So not a bail fund has not been created yet, but if you are capable, please go to Cooperation Jackson and make a donation. The movement has to protect each other and ourselves. And so if you're able to do so, please join me at the end of this. I'll go and make a donation, and I hope you can as well. So that's the update. So now let me step in, and to the best of my ability, let me channel Kali, who is a friend, but also a mentor and a comrade. And we are in frequent conversation about this. So I'll just say a couple of things. One, when we talk about what will the post-pandemic look like, let's remember this. We are not yet out of the pandemic, right? And Kali makes this comment frequently because he and I are on workshops a lot together. Number one, we're not yet out of the pandemic. But isn't it interesting how quickly the ruling elite have changed the line from essential workers to unskilled workers? Remember, they were unskilled workers. Then in the pandemic, they became essential workers to make sure that this thing go. And let's be clear, that's why poor, mostly Black and brown workers were literally sacrifice zones in order to make this whole thing work, right? So I think it's really worth just naming that we're seeing that shift already. The second thing, capitalism is actually not broken because capitalism is working exactly as it's designed to do. That is, it's commodifying everything, and that everything is being privatized and everything is being produced in order to be bought and paid for at a profit. So that's a bit of a play on words with Mel's earlier link. I haven't read the essay, and I know that Mel Figueroa does not believe that. I'll invite her if she thinks that capitalism is not working the way it's designed to work. But that's part of the point, right? Capitalism was never designed to protect human rights. Capitalism was never designed in order to facilitate a just, liberated, ecologically sustainable, regenerative world. That's kind of the problem, y'all. But as both Mel and Michael made abundantly clear, this pandemic has exposed and laid bare the horrors of capitalism so profoundly. So I think that it's important to recognize that capitalism is not broken. It's working the way it's designed to work. And I want to add this to the conversation. it is also coming to its end. Capitalism, as we understand it and as have experienced it, is literally ending for two important reasons. One, because it is destroying Mother Earth faster than she can replenish herself. So the idea of commodity production and profit maximization and unlimited growth is literally destroying the Earth faster than she can replenish herself. So there's an existential reason that it's going to end. And a hat tip to Kali Acuna, who helped me see this, even if somehow there was another 2 or 3 Earths to plunder, capitalism as we understand it would also be coming to an end because of how it operates. Remember, it extracts the surplus value of the labor of the worker as profit. That's literally how it's designed to work. So if I am the capitalist, it is to my incentive to put Mel Figueroa to work. Why? To extract the surplus value of her labor. It is to my benefit to put Michael ONeill to work. Why? To extract the surplus value of his labor. It is to my benefit to put Ruthie Engelke to work. Why? To extract the surplus value of her labor. It actually, the way capitalism has been operating, the more people that I could put to work as a capitalist, the better, because it was just more profit. Actually, I was competing against other capitalists. That's actually how the, quote, market economy worked. If I was able to produce or to put more people to work, it was to my benefit. Not because I care about Mel or Michael or Ruthie. It's because it was a way to generate profit. Here's the point. With automation, industrialism, robotics, the way technology for the means of production are currently working, they don't need nearly as many workers. Automation is happening in every sector. I mean, every sector of the economy. So capitalism, as it's currently being utilized, would be having to end because the social economic relations were ending. But don't applaud that. Don't just get excited, because capitalism and the ruling elite have a plan. And this is where I'm going to land it and hopefully get into a discussion with Mel, Michael, and the rest of you. We are in a conjuncture space. Hat tip to Antonio Gramsci, but really a hat tip to Mel Figueroa, who taught me this and basically taught me Gramsci that I had first read as a college student all those years ago. If you want to know history, if you want to know what's going to happen tomorrow, study today. Right? And if you want to know what's happening today and really understand what's happening today, study yesterday, because history works that way. Like they come in arcs, and that's the flow of history. And that's true, except in critical moments of conjuncture, interstitial space, when somehow either inherent contradictions get such that there's going to be a break, or maybe they're not even contradictions. Maybe there's just some kind of huge change, from agrarian society to industrial society. The introduction of the cotton gin into the cotton economy. There are some moments where there are huge breaks. We are in such a break, my friend, and that is what I'm trying to get at here. That we are, just as the world shifted from going from a basically hunter-gatherer-gardener state to what Daniel O'Quinn calls totalitarian agriculture, right? That huge shift, and that took 1,000 years before it changed the country. Just as then going from an agrarian society to an industrial one, and in that period of time was when fascism, as we understand it, not just totalitarianism, but actual fascism, right, became a political economic reality, because the society itself, the political economy, was literally being reworked. That's why fascism, as a potential way to organize the political economy, actually became possible. And again, I'm encouraging Mel to correct me if I get any of this wrong, because she's helped me really understand this. That's why fascism is emerging today, not just in the United States, but all over the world, because we're morphing from an industrial society to something else, whether you call it a knowledge-based society, one based on electromagnetism. No matter what you call it, the current system is coming to an end. And so what will a post-pandemic economy look like? Exactly as Michael ONeill said. It could be a jumpin', joyous, beautiful, eco-socialist solidarity economy, like really beautiful world, because there's enough for everyone if we just share and if we actually return to the indigenous roots that all of us descend from. Say that again. We all descend from indigenous peoples who were once in right relation with Mother Earth and the ecosystem that actually nurtured them. All of us descend from that. That's our birthright. We're supposed to live that way. Or it's going to be a dystopian fascist nightmare. I don't say this lightly. I honestly don't see the neoliberal center able to hold. Even if you wanted to return to what it was just before the pandemic, it's not possible. We are entering into final game. We are either going to win everything or nothing. And I believe that by following the political economy of the social solidarity economy and finding my way back to the roots of my ancestors who in Ireland and Scotland once lived in right relation, I can learn to live in right relation, and we can have a peaceful, just, ecologically sustainable, and democratic society. Peace.
Thank you, David. Now we have an opportunity for some discussion, and I want to encourage you to use the chat if you have any questions for any of the three panelists. I want to go back and address something that Leela Roberts from the North Coast Small Business Development Center put in the chat, and Nell, maybe you can address this. She says, one of the important and interesting patterns from the pandemic is how many business owners reported to me that their employees were not able or willing to return to the workplace because they were able to and wanted to do care work instead, at home, for family, for community. This is the work the underpaid working classes were doing when state plus federal unemployment insurance enabled it.
Absolutely. I think caring is our species being, as David said. I think any of us would, except maybe sociopaths perhaps, would prefer to spend our hours and our days and our energy and our time to care for our family, our land, our community, than to go to a shit job for 40 to 80 hours a week. I mean, if you actually go to back to the birth of capitalism, the whole point of enclosure and the Black Acts and the and violent colonialism was literally to force people into a mentality that would make them that would compel them to enter into wage labor. Remember that, I think, centuries of business people and sort of capitalist philosophers have tried to convince us that, wage labor is, something that we inherently desire as people. But, the historical facts is that it took hundreds of years of violence, of the witch hunts, of violence against women, violence against indigenous peoples, the literal kidnapping of Africans from their continents, and the institution of chattel slavery to compel people to be in this exploited relationship. So, I'm absolutely not surprised, by that observation. And again, bringing in another concept from Antonio Gramsci, as David mentioned, one of his main concepts is that of hegemony, right? The way that cultural and philosophical and social conditioning has reinforces particular systems of power. And what we're seeing, what the pandemic has precipitated, which is a good thing, is the breakdown in that type of hegemony, right? And so what can we do is we are at this conjuncture point where a lot of people are open to new ideas, new attitudes, new things, because like for the first time, perhaps in many people's lives, they had an opportunity to glimpse a different type of existence, and they want it. When we work with the community, doing TEK, talking about doing land management, contracting, turning land management into a skilled and a career choice. Right now, when you think about land management, who does it? The CCC brings in inmate labor. Right now, the hegemonic idea is that land management is a punishment, right? Or they bring in these contractors that they just cookie cutter, clear cut, they do whatever, right? But TEK, sorry, traditional ecological knowledge. That is the knowledge of indigenous peoples and the relationship of people to a particular place, right? And so when we do these trainings, there are people who have been loggers for, fifth generation loggers who go, oh my God, I want to do this for the rest of my life. I don't want to run a masticator anymore. I want to do this, right? So, remember that it's the exploitative relationship of capitalism has been violently thrust upon us against our, I would say, they tell us it's human nature, but it really is like a human nature that's been literally beaten into generations of people. And to undo that, we have an opportunity to do that as well. So yeah, I don't want to keep rambling, so I'll throw it to David or Michael to address that.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. Thank you, Mel. So I don't have David's level of confidence about the immediacy with which automation will eliminate jobs and labor. That's not to say I think David is wrong. I have a higher degree of uncertainty about it. The relationship between how technological change creates demands for different kinds of labor, even as it eliminates other forms of labor, is really, to me, is complex and nonlinear. And it remains to be seen what this new wave of AI and automation and things like that, it will definitely eliminate jobs. We're seeing that. Many of us on this call might have already felt the effects of that. It also does create demand for new kinds of work. I kind of look at it as like an Etch-a-Sketch or like a Tetris or like a Sisyphusian boulder, where new demands for labor arise within a society, and capital treats those new demands for new kinds of labor, different kinds of jobs, as a kind of frontier. And I use the word frontier invoking the violence and exploitation and extraction that the people on this webinar understand that this country and this society has applied to frontiers, right? So where workers have not already organized and have not already historically established their rights as workers into just compensation or relatively just compensation through strikes and through enduring, Pinkerton leg breakers and, horrible repressive laws and things like that, then they, treat all of those new jobs as low wage, low social value, low respect positions. And in fact, many of the industrial positions that, we look at being part of the heyday of the labor uprisings of the 20s and 30s, there was a point where those assembly line positions were, they were the equivalent of Uber drivers of their day. They were the equivalent of Postmates cycle couriers, right? And so to me, the lesson is we, as a society, we have to decide, we have to organize that we're not going to allow these positions, these new forms of work to be exploited in that way. But the real lesson is, let's get off of the treadmill. Let's put the boulder to the side, because we could spend the next millennia, dealing with these new positions and new jobs and new forms of work that are thrown at us, and then trying to organize through blood, sweat, and tears, literally, to get the kind of social respect and regard and just compensation for that work. Or we can build the structures that we've been talking about throughout this conference so that we, as a real community, as collaborators, as empowered human beings, are deciding, not just as workers organizing from the bottom up to, to make demands against the bosses, but that we are the power structure. We are making decisions about our own communities, about our own jobs, about the workplaces where we have democratic input. And so regardless of whether or not things play out as David said, we still need to end capitalism as it is. And eventually, I think it will run the course that he described. It's just a question of is it 10 years or 100, or are we going to be destroyed by floods before then? So let's win the world that we want, so that we're not playing that roulette wheel.
Thank you, Michael. We have another question from Jack Strasberg. Jack says, I believe that the most important thing that needs to happen is for the movement for a better world to get much better organized, coordinated, and collaborative. How do you see this happening? And do you see this happening?
I see glimmers of it. I'll just jump in really quickly. So I think that we have been in a kind of organizing dark age for a time that we've only really just sort of started emerging out of in the last few years. I take a lot of value from the organizing teachings of Jane McAlevey and some affiliated groups, the kind of SCIU, old school Congress of Industrial Organizing, whole worker organizing methods that have been put to great work in teacher strikes across the country and nurses strikes and nurse and teacher organizing. I suspect that just as, again, ranked choice voting and proportional representation advocates have a lot to learn from workplace democracy organizers and from community land trust organizers and public bank organizers, the people who come out of organizing traditions like that, where they have identified how to find organic leaders and communities and constituencies, and really identifying the craft of organizing. And that organizing is not just whatever you want it to be, and it's not just whatever the latest online fad points it to be. Then it's through that continuous cross-pollination that we can make some more gains.
Yeah, definitely. I see this happening again to remind folks that there are 574 federally recognized sovereign nations within the territory or the boundaries of the nation state of the United States, right? And hundreds and perhaps thousands more tribal communities that are not federally recognized. But just to sort of focus, for now on the federally recognized part, I see this happening. In the work that I do in occupied Mechoopda territory with the Mechoopda tribe, but also, working for advocacy for tribal sovereignty, rights, contracting, public lands, co-management. This is happening all over the place, right? Like I said, the train is leaving the station when it comes to tribal folks, tribal communities exercising that sovereignty to create, the world, this better world. And in many ways, it's what we call it's starting to look like what we call a dual power strategy, right? It's not really a strategy because nobody's up there sort of pulling it, but it's happening, and like we can get on that train, which I think we should get on that train, or not, or miss it, right? And so that's part of what we need to understand is that communities are exercising self-determination, and that this is happening on a widespread scale. Deb Haaland being Secretary of the Interior, having, being the top steward of 20% of the landmass of the United States, as well as 30% of the energy rights. All of that stuff is happening, and that is definitely something that we need to track and support. Wherever you are, find out what is happening in your area and support those efforts. I also have been working on advocacy in terms of the climate legislation that's going down, and the Green New Deal that AOC has introduced, has reintroduced rather, and all of those efforts. I'm seeing like large coalitions coming around that, and while again there's political limitations in the ruling class and all of that, there is I think an opening. And, I tend to look for openings, going back to my roots. My people from the Eastern Visayas Islands in the Philippines, we were pirates. And so, I actually learn and take a lot from the history of pirates, as well as the sort of the idea of like by any means necessary, and what that means. I do see that there are openings to, we can understand, right, that there cannot be infinite growth on a finite planet, and everything that David is saying about capitalism's running into its limits and responding in the way that they are is happening. On that, but by that same token, there are some opportunities, I think, that are out there to pressure governments and leaders to literally sort of starve the sectors that are destroying us and feed the sectors that will take us into a better future, like solidarity economy projects, like tribal sovereignty projects, like all the like cooperation, Jackson, all of these communities that are surviving because that's what needs to happen. There's opportunities to basically turn that around, turn the ship around, and it's going to take all of us, and it's going to happen in a multiplicity of ways. It's one of the things that I've learned as an activist over the years, and as somebody who has been in a survival mode for a very long time, is that sometimes in an imperfect situation, you go for the maximum what you can get and go from there, and just the multiplicity. I feel encouraged by the multiplicity of initiatives and aspirations that people are really feeling like this is the time to go for it. And let's not be limited by what we have been told is possible, but go for what is necessary. And the more that we do that, the more that we can turn the ship around, I think.
So thank you, Jack, for that question, because reminder to anchor the question do we see the world getting better organized, coordinated, and collaborative? Is it happening? Do we see it happening? And I'm going to actually ground it in my lived experience. I'm going to start from here in Jarajiji, also known as Eureka, and then talk about Lichi Bay or Humboldt Bay, and then move out from my ecosystem. Because here, inspired by, it's no exaggeration. Cooperation Humboldt exists because Cooperation Jackson exists. We literally saw what they were doing, rooted in their community, coming out of their historic traditions and their lived experience in Jackson, and began to create an experiment. And so we said, well, we don't live in Jackson and we don't live in Chiapas. So, it's not going to look like Zapatismo here. Like what we do here in this community is going to look different. So I'm very humbled and excited that Cooperation Humboldt is now partnering in a deep and authentic way with the Wiyot Tribal Council, not with individuals, or yes, with individuals, but the Tribal Council. We are in relationship with the Tribal Council to help to create an Indigenous-led community land trust to engage in regenerative economic development. With the vision to helping to facilitate what the Wiyot did with Tuluwat and returning that land into what it once was, to do it all over, and to also engage in building and construction and food production and distribution, literally to recreate the economy so that the economy serves people as opposed to people just serving the economy. And what that means, even here, is not just with the Wiyot, but actually engaging with College of the Redwoods, with the local Small Business Development Center. So a hat tip to Layla Roberts, who's here participating. She was on an earlier panel. We're actually working with anybody and everybody that's willing to work with us. You know, at Cooperation Humboldt, we're very clear and unambiguous that we believe that we need to restructure society. We are clear that we believe that this society currently is fundamentally racist, it's fundamentally sexist, it's fundamentally class oppressive, and that these huge transnational corporations are going to destroy the planet. Literally on our website, go to cooperationhumboldt.com. Right up there is what we believe. Click the link. We are clear and unambiguous. We also say, we believe we can work with you even if you don't believe these things. But we're going to be clear about who we are and what we believe. So again, the teachings from Mel Figueroa, right? Like, that's actually what praxis means. You have to have a practice that you actually do, where you live, work, play, and pray. Far too many times do I meet leftists who get so caught up in the theoretical grounding that they get lost and unmoored from the actual practice. So we are engaging in an actual practice to reconfigure this. And we are connected with Mel Figueroa and Ali Matters Knight and others in Machuca territory. And we are working with folks in Oakland and San Francisco and that Bay Area, because Humboldt Bay is also the Bay Area, by the way, but the other Bay Area, right? And I am really excited because I just saw the Native Roots Network is with us. They're in Chico. Imagine that, Mel. Can you imagine? You see what's happening here, right? Native Roots Network and the Collab Shasta working together with us. Y'all, we are literally in the early stages of creating like Ecotopia, or what Octavia Butler actually described, like literally our experiment through the leadership of indigenous wisdom and understanding at how to properly steward this place. It can happen here. And the last thing I want to do is lift up Transition US. I see transitioners have been participating actively in this conference. People Strike has been actively participating, the Green Eco-Socialist Network. We are beginning to cohere in a way, frankly, that I haven't seen since the 1990s global justice movement. And remember this, and I'll conclude here. The global justice movement, we were ascendant. We were winning before September 11, 2001. We were winning then. We are just now like really recovering from September 11th. And I'm here to tell you, like, this pandemic, like this crisis and this crucible is actually forcing people together to figure out ways to win. And I could say more, but I want to stop and just really appreciate the commentary that I'm seeing and the conversation that we're having with Mel and Michael.
Cool. Thank you, David. I wanted to ask Mel if you would expand a little bit about traditional ecological knowledge, the TEKs, and what do you see as the intersection between engaging those with electoral politics?
Absolutely. So I'm going to share my screen again and give a little bit. I know I sort of started to throw around TEK because I'm used to it. So I just wanted to go sort of roll back a little and explain what that is. So this is part of a presentation that Ali and I give to local agencies and folks that are interested in the program. So traditional ecological knowledge is a system of ecological science and technology developed by indigenous peoples over 20,000 years. What Ali likes to say is basket is a technology, right? TEK is a science, right? It is a science based on long-term observation, experiments, and outcomes over generations, right? The other thing to understand about traditional ecological knowledge is that it's everywhere. Like I said, every place has a people that are of that place. And even I think just yesterday in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences came out with an article that that showed that for at least the last 12,000 years, there was almost no place on Earth that was untouched by humans, right? There's a now, I mean, basically Western science is proving what indigenous peoples have always known is that, you know, there is no such thing as wilderness, right? Wildlands really is a misnomer, right? That people have used their labor, right, to manage lands sustainably, and for the most part sustainably, right? And have privileged knowledge of the active human management required in native ecosystems. In fact, you know, again, all of us are indigenous to a place, right? Even if that's not where we live now, but to think about how, you know, for 99% of human history, humans have co-evolved with their ecosystems, you know, and that also, you know, things like climate change, pandemics, disruptions have happened before. And we literally exist because our ancestors at some point survived that, right? And so, you know, specific people who are specific to a place can like understand and have knowledge of how they were able to survive in that specific place through a catastrophe. So that's one of the reasons that traditional ecological knowledge, again, decolonizing the framework that a lot of people have that, you know, indigenous means primitive, or we have to go back to some hunter-gatherer. It's like, no, if you understand it as a science, if you understand it as a science that is thousands of years older than, you know, modern Western science, then you can understand and sort of give it the respect that it's due. That's how, you know, that gives us a whole new perspective. Some of us a whole new perspective. Some people have had it all along, right? But a whole new perspective on the importance of sovereignty and to listen to and to decolonize our place, right? Wherever we are, we can contribute to that. So so this is kind of like what we do in the Chico Traditional Ecological Stewardship Program. There's workforce development as well as contracting. So, you know, so Ali Metters-Knight, who is a Mechoopda tribal member, is working with the tribe to create certification programs for both native and non-native. Right now, it's just for tribal members, but then it will eventually open up, because again, everybody who touches the lands needs to understand that there is a knowledge associated with it. It also prepares a large-scale ecologically trained workforce to do the things that the work that needs to be done in terms of ecological restoration and maintenance and resilience. If you understand that you have to actively manage the land in order to maintain it, then that's jobs, right? That's economy. That's a locally based economy. And then stewardship contracting, again, do we know who is contracted right now to maintain our public lands, right? I do. I know a lot of people don't. I know that it's, you know, that a lot of them are giant corporations, right? So that do not have that traditional knowledge of how to work the land. So that's part of changing that paradigm to a place-based and again, ones that respect and acknowledge the authority of Indigenous peoples over the place that over their place, or the Okay, I hope that's. Oh yes, and also in terms of the politics of it, I have just this slide about in California that there are laws that. And legal authorities that need to be respected, that aren't always respected in practice now, but are existing and are settled law. They're in place, and part of what we can contribute as non-natives to shifting that hegemony is to insist that these laws be respected, right? SB 18 requires tribal consultation when making designations or amendments to open space or general plan, and AB 52 designates anything that a tribe says is significant to them, not just what they call stone and bones, but also living cultural resources, plants, and entire landscapes. And that has to do, and that's relevant to land use policy, right? And so these are things that we can insist be respected, right? And that and can make more meaningful than the way that it's generally practiced now. If that makes sense, right? Thanks.
Thank you, Mel. I had a couple thoughts to offer, which is that one of the highlights of participating in this conference for me has been reinforcing how necessary it is for us to overcome maybe some of the limitations of interest that I know I have had to overcome in my development as a nonviolent eco-socialist revolutionary. I think my experience is maybe somewhat common in that you enter movement work through a particular lens. Like I'm in it for media reform, or I'm in it for electoral reform, or workplace organizing, trade unionism, social justice organizing, public bank development. It's like each of us has our kind of own entry point based on our organic interests, maybe the teachers and other leaders that we've been exposed to in our lifetime, or the situations that we were thrown into, right? The systems of oppression that were most intense for us. And so also that operates in a mainstream culture that I think encourages individualism and specialization in people, and also even within the do-gooder, groovy, nonprofit, NGO sector, competition between organizations, between 501c3s, between different organizations for people's volunteer hours, people's donations and things like that. And so I think what I'm driving at is that it's imperative that we break out of these silos and that internal resistance that we have of like, I don't want to learn about public banks. I'm a ranked choice voting organizer. I don't want to learn about, this or that because I'm this thing over here. We all have to come together and learn from each other at the very least, and support each other at the very least, because I don't think we're going to win many, if any, of these things if we're not fighting for them and how they support each other. And as a member of the Green Party, and again, you can reach me over email at meo@gp.org, or check out the Green Party online at gp.org. It's beautiful to see, how we have different committees and we have different candidates on ballot lines across the country who do pull together a kind of mosaic of issues together into a platform and a holistic platform. But that array of candidates and committees and platforms has a long way to go to match the breadth and richness of the program that I've seen represented in this conference. And so that's part of my personal mission in my involvement in that organization and other organizations is to, broaden my own involvement in education on the things that Mel and David and others have spoken about this weekend, and also to make that a kind of a cultural expectation that you don't come into a group with a single bullet view of change, that, well, we just need to change this one thing and then everything else will fall into place. That's not how it's going to work. And I encourage everyone to be intensely skeptical, if not avoidant of people who are bound to that way of thinking. I'm going to take a lesson from David, right? They can work with you, right? You can work with them, even if they don't believe what you believe, but definitely don't buy into what they believe in terms of that silver bullet, single issue framework.
Thank you so much, Michael. It is getting late and it's about time for final thoughts. But I did want to bring to the panelists, as we do another go round for about 2 or 3 minutes of your final thoughts, just a couple of comments. Rich Whitney says, I'm wondering if one possible next step might be for the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network to move beyond the network model to more of a coalition model, and trying to unify the Solidarity Economy movement behind a common political program. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up was the idea that was brought in, and I find it in a minute of who it was. Here it was. Pete Christensen asked, how do we integrate spirituality into our movement? So let's just do a final go round of thoughts. Anybody burning to start? All right, Mel, I'm going to give it to you then.
All right, I was going first in this thing, but it's all good. I usually don't like to go first, but yeah. And so first, in terms of the, sort of coordinated political programs, I mean, absolutely. I think that, coalitions should work to clarify, what they want. Now, I was thinking about this in terms of reading the other comment about like who is our enemy and things like that. And it kind of reminds me of if anybody has rides motorcycles, and if you're going past a curve, if you concentrate on the bumps on the road, you're going to crash. Right? You gotta look at where you're going, right? And then that's how you can navigate that curve. And so, and I think that I think a lot of folks are getting some clarity, and we continue to struggle for clarity again about what we want around that curve. But also at the same time, again, understanding that it's a very complex place, and and like Michael said, there's no one silver bullet for everything. And so I want to sort of warn a little bit against that kind of like consolidation and centralization. One of the things that I have learned from, again, leaning into the mentality of a place-based mindset is that everybody's solutions may be different based on wherever their circumstances are. I think embracing that multiplicity in a but being unified in terms of the purpose of working towards a better world will help us, have a more rounded view and understanding each other in terms of what we all need, but also respecting sovereignty and the multiplicity of efforts that are going on right now. Just real quick in terms of the spirituality question. I have gained a lot from sort of reconnecting with spirituality, but in many ways, I guess. It doesn't. I don't center it publicly as much as I just let it seep into the way that I work. Right. Some of these things that I have learned or are learning, I don't have to trumpet it, but I have to let it seep into my own bones, and let it infuse the way that I work with people and the way I think about, navigating a very complex reality. So I guess it's more for me, but it comes out in my actions, I guess, not necessarily in professing a creed, so to speak.
David, you want to go next and let Michael take us home?
Sure. So thank you for those two questions. I'm going to take on the spirituality question first to really acknowledge and be vulnerable. If you had asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have scoffed and said, I'm a serious revolutionary engaged in understanding material conditions and like there's no room for that kind of romanticism. I'm grounded in the empirical, quote, real world. This is how real I'm going to get. And then about 7 years ago, I had my first ever sacred spiritual mystical experience with ayahuasca in ceremony led by an indigenous person, and found myself surrounded by what I first thought was just a spiral helix. And then I realized we're actually a fractal. And okay, mind blown. I could literally do a full blown performance art piece on telling you that experience and how much it meant to me. And I'm going to say really clearly, the work that I have been doing with the Wiyot tribe and with Chase Iron Eyes and others has made it clear to me that part of what, like, I am a continuation of ancestors, literally generation after generation after generation after generation. Being born, I was not born expecting to be born into this dominator, power over, fucked up world. I'm supposed to have been born into a world where, and my birthright is to be born into a world where the culture not only welcomed me, but taught me to revere as sacred all of life and my proper role in it. That's my birthright. That was stolen from me by the English Empire, who traumatized my ancestors, pillaged and plundered and drove them off of their land. And then that generation of my ancestors came to this land and traumatized and brutalized others and ran them off of their land. So there's trauma upon trauma. And as Michelle Vassal, Wiyot Tribal Administrator, is teaching me, continues to teach me, the work that we are doing in relationship is place-based healing. We are healing the land, we are healing ourselves, we are healing each other. So everything that I'm doing, just Mel said, it is infusing everything that I do. I don't usually sort of lead with sacred, spiritual, etc., but believe me, it affects everything that I do. Rich, your question around a political program, you know I believe that. I continue to work with everybody. Here's my final thought. We are going to have to engage the state, because you may not believe in the state, but the state believes in you. And so we have to engage the electoral politics authentically as peaceful revolutionaries, and we cannot fetishize electoral politics. Like, that's not the end all be all. It's not the actually main place. Electoral politics is merely one more front of struggle where we engage and grapple with power, but really we're creating the world that we want right here, right now, engaging the state, because the state is able to either make things impossible or much more difficult or much easier, but they can't prevent it. We are going to win. Michael?
Thank you, David. I think that the energy around grappling with spirituality gets to the why, like the big capital W why of why do we want to continue to exist as a species? Why do we care for each other? Why do we seek to build a more just and sustainable and collaborative world? It's that capital W why of that, because it's to just like fulfill a biological program to keep reproducing. No, like that's not a satisfying answer for me. It's seeking to that question of why do we matter to each other? Why is it important that we relate to each other? breaking free of that bizarre cult of economic orthodoxy of like the rational actor, and I'm making efficient choices based on inputs and outputs. Of course not, right? And so it's interesting because like we frequently think of spirituality as relating to religion, but like we have religions in our society, like capitalist orthodox economics, which is functionally a religion in many of the ways that we think about it. It passes itself off as a science or as a kind of empirical inevitability, but that's a con, as Professor Wolf talked about earlier this weekend. So I identify as an ecstatic humanist, and I seek, answers to questions about meaning in my own life, and like, where does the meaning come from in the work that I'm doing? And then also like, what is the meaning that we are creating together as a community, as a nation, as a world? And that has to be the fuel for this. That has to power the why for the how and the what that we're doing in this struggle.
Thank you, Michael, Mel, and David for this session. Our hearts go out to Kali and Cooperation Jackson. Don't forget to just flip them a donation if you can to help support that. Next up is disaster response through community resilience. That's starting in just a few minutes. You can flip on over to that one, followed by prisoner solidarity organizing during a pandemic. I want to make sure that folks are able to come to our final session, which is what's next. That's when we're going to do some organizing locally. We'll be able to get into some small groups in order to talk to other people. So I highly encourage you to come to that session. It's at 6 o'clock Pacific or 9 o'clock Eastern, or wherever you are in between or on the other sides of that. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you at the next session.